My name, once the lead on every meeting agenda, was replaced by silence. Photos of me with clients vanished from the hallway, but I kept one thing, the first handwritten letter from our very first client. They can keep the office. I kept the trust. They said it was just a restructuring. That today would be my final day. The conference room smelled faintly of citrus polish and betrayal, clean, sterile, like they'd tried to scrub away the humanity before I walked in. I sat at the far end of the obsidian glass table, its reflective surface catching the fluorescent lights above and bouncing them back like a spotlight. A stage, my final scene. Across from me sat Reed Stratton, Ardent's newly minted managing partner. 8 months on the job, and already he'd mastered that practiced expression. Executive sympathy marinated in strategic distance. He leaned forward slightly, elbows not quite touching the table, engaged but not too familiar. His navy suit was crisp, his tie narrow and bloodless. Marla, he said, and my name felt foreign on his tongue. This isn't personal. It's a company-wide initiative. You've been an invaluable contributor, but with the new direction we're taking, certain legacy positions... Legacy fat, I said quietly. He blinked. I overheard your call last week. That was the phrase, wasn't it? Reed's jaw flexed once, just beneath the bone. He didn't deny it. He just slid the manila folder across the table like a man pushing a check to a contractor he never intended to see again. 2 months severance, health insurance until the quarter closed. A note from HR that sounded like it had been written by a machine trying to simulate remorse. Beside him, Janine from HR shifted uncomfortably. She'd avoided eye contact since I walked in. I'd helped onboard her 12 years ago, helped her navigate her divorce when she was too ashamed to tell her manager. Now she couldn't even look at me. The security guard posted outside the glass wall wore a uniform 2 sizes too big and a badge that gleamed like a threat. I had written the security protocols that required his presence. 15 years ago, the idea had seemed prudent. Protect the firm during terminations, ensure dignity, minimize conflict. I hadn't imagined it would one day be weaponized against me. I kept my hands folded, spine straight. Dignity is easier to maintain when it's all you have left. Your contributions have been deeply valued, Reed continued, still wearing that executive mask, as if the act of repeating the phrase might make it true. But the industry's evolving. We have to align with where the market is going. Ah, I said, and where is trust going these days? Reed didn't answer. I stood, slow and measured, as if I were ending a meeting I'd initiated. My fingertips brushed the folder once before I left it there on the table. Severance didn't interest me, not after 25 years of building this company's heart with my own hands. Not after watching them try to replace that heart with an algorithm. The hallway felt colder than I remembered, quieter too, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I passed the framed photos of our biggest milestones, clients we'd onboarded, conferences we'd hosted, partnerships I had brokered over late-night phone calls and cross-country flights. My name wasn't in any of those captions, but I'd been there, every step. When I reached my office, the dashboard blinked red. Access revoked. I stared at the screen for a moment. It was the platform I had designed, a trust mapping system, AI-driven, sure, but grounded in human intuition. It was the reason our clients stayed, year after year. They were still using my code, my structure, my philosophy, just not me. A cardboard box had been placed on my desk, my coffee mug with the cracked handle, a Polaroid of the original team from the first year. The fountain pen Graham had given me on our 10th anniversary with the note, "For the woman who taught us what clients really want." I picked it up. I didn't cry. Grief would come later. Right now, all I felt was stillness, like the second before a storm breaks. My phone buzzed. A single message from Elise Radford. "Tell me this isn't true. Call me now." I didn't call her. Not yet. I stood there, surrounded by cardboard and silence, and let the truth settle like dust around me. They thought they'd erased me. They had no idea what they'd just set in motion. There was a time when Ardent wasn't a name people dropped at biotech conferences or printed across glossy brochures at CES. It was a scrappy dream carved out of a co-working space above a falafel joint in downtown San Francisco. The air always smelled faintly of cumin and ambition. Back then, we didn't have a product roadmap. We had Post-it notes and a whiteboard that never got erased, just layered with new ideas. But we had something else, something rarer. We had Graham Whitaker. Graham didn't speak in bullet points. He spoke in truths, the kind that stuck with you long after the meeting ended. "Trust isn't a feature," he told me once, leaning against the windowsill with a paper cup of burned coffee in hand. "It's the whole damn product." I believed him. I built my entire career on that sentence. I wasn't hired because I dazzled with jargon or wore power blazers. I was brought on because I understood people, what made them loyal, what made them stay. Over the years, I became Ardent's unofficial memory. I remembered every client's wedding anniversary, the names of their kids, their board's pain points. I didn't need an algorithm to tell me when someone was about to jump ship. I could hear it in their silence. We didn't use the word empathy back then. We just practiced it. I built our client insight dashboard from the ground up, an intuitive tool that gave executives a human lens on performance metrics, not just who bought but why, and how they felt about it. It became our secret weapon. Clients didn't just renew with us, they trusted us. They trusted me. But trust is invisible on a balance sheet. Things shifted after the Series C round. The money came in with beautiful strings, polished investors with tight smiles, and an insatiable appetite for scaling. We moved into a glass high-rise with touchscreen elevators and a rooftop bar no one had time to use. The whiteboard was replaced with quarterly projections. The coffee improved. The culture soured. Then came Reed Stratton. He walked into our first leadership meeting in an ash gray suit and a tighter agenda. His slide decks were immaculate. Minimalist fonts, sleek transitions, and just enough data to make you question your gut. He spoke like a man rehearsing the future, fast and clean, no room for nostalgia. At first, he was polite, respectful even. But I've been in the game long enough to recognize the temperature drop when it happens. My calendar started thinning. Projects I'd led for years were reassigned. Access to the dashboard I'd built was temporarily suspended for restructuring. Clients I had nurtured through IPOs and acquisitions were suddenly being managed by junior staff with MBAs and no memory. And I stayed. I stayed because I thought loyalty meant something. Because Graham still sat in the corner office, even if he looked more tired each day. Because I believed, foolishly, that being part of the foundation made you untouchable. But foundations crack quietly. And sometimes the house gets sold before you even realize your name's no longer on the deed. Looking back, it wasn't one betrayal. It was a slow erosion, a dozen little cuts, the kind you only notice once the bleeding starts. Still, I showed up. Early mornings, late nights, holiday weekends. I kept the flame alive while the new regime rewired the circuits. Loyalty, as it turns out, is only noble until it becomes inconvenient. And by the time I saw what they were doing, I was already standing in a house I no longer recognized, holding a key that opened nothing. It happened on a Tuesday. I arrived early, as always. The city hadn't quite woken up yet. The fog still draped over the skyline like a hush, the streets slick with dew and yesterday's regrets. I liked that hour. It made the building feel like mine again, before the buzzwords and badge scans and hollow smiles filed in. I tapped my card at the elevator panel. It blinked green. At least the building still recognized me. My office lights hummed on as I entered, sensors greeting me like muscle memory. I set down my bag, sipped from the same chipped mug I'd used since we were still above the falafel shop, and pulled up the dashboard. Access denied. I stared at the screen, clicked again. Access denied. I refreshed. I logged out, logged back in. Nothing. Then came the final message, a timestamp, a system ID, the name of the admin who had changed my permissions. It wasn't a mistake. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, useless. The dashboard, my dashboard, had been gutted of me. Years of relationship modeling, predictive trust algorithms, strategic sentiment insights, all locked behind a wall I used to guard, a wall they built with my blueprint. I sat still, absorbing it, until a sound outside my door snapped me out of it. Reed's voice, low and clipped. He was pacing the hallway outside, on the phone. Look, the restructuring lets us trim legacy fat without triggering legal exposure. The optics are clean. No one's irreplaceable. A pause. No, not even her. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Somewhere in the distance, the espresso machine hissed, and then, as if summoned by cosmic symmetry, my phone buzzed. Elise Radford. Is it true? You're out? Call me. She didn't say fired. She said out, like a limb severed, not a position dissolved. Elise was sharp that way, the kind of woman who could smell blood beneath perfume. We'd worked together for over a decade, through board turnovers, mergers, FDA recalls. I'd navigated her company through one of the nastiest cybersecurity leaks the industry had seen. We didn't exchange holiday baskets. We exchanged truths. And now she was reaching out before the company even had time to spin the narrative. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over Market Street, the city stretching like a beast that didn't care who fell beneath its feet. Below, a delivery truck idled in the red zone. The driver leaned on his horn, impatient and unseen. Behind me, my office was already beginning to feel like a museum exhibit. My name still etched on the door, my coat still draped over the back of my chair, but everything else, ghosted. 25 years of relationships reduced to a spreadsheet. It wasn't the title they took from me. It was the trust, the network, the muscle memory of who I was in that building. And the worst part, they thought I'd go quietly, fade into some LinkedIn announcement with a polite goodbye and a sanitized quote. I turned from the window, checked the text again, and slipped my phone into my pocket. They didn't know it yet, but something had shifted, and it wasn't me who was out. It was them, out of time. I didn't rage, didn't storm the boardroom, or fire off one of those righteous all-staff emails you hear about in startup lore. I'd seen those kinds of exits before. They made headlines, then they faded. The world moved on. The damage stayed with the one who screamed. I didn't fight them. I disappeared. but absence has a weight. And mine, apparently, was heavier than they expected. It started with Elise. Of course it did. 2 days after I was walked out, I found myself seated across from her at a private table in the back of Orsa, the kind of restaurant that made a statement just by where it placed you. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just looked me dead in the eye and said, "Who the hell thought they could replace you?" I didn't answer. I just sipped my wine. Then came Harding, Westridge's COO. We had never been close. He'd always seemed like a man married to metrics, allergic to warmth, but we'd found mutual respect in quarterly meetings and post-review silence. He called me from his personal number, said he didn't like the tone of the new team, said something felt off. 3 days later, the CFO from Alta Labs reached out via LinkedIn of all things. Heard a rumor, hope it's not true. Can we meet? One by one, they found me. I didn't chase. I didn't need to. Trust, when built properly, doesn't need a title or a signature line. It remembers where it came from, and more importantly, it notices when it's gone. I began taking meetings, quiet ones, back tables, dim offices, long drives to undisclosed locations where non-disclosure agreements were slid across the table before coffee was even poured. They weren't just asking where I'd go. They were asking if I'd take them with me. That's when I met with Blackwell. They were newer, leaner, less flashy than ardent, but sharp, strategic, hungry, not for chaos, but for legacy, for something with roots. Their West Coast expansion had stalled twice due to lack of relationships. Their systems were solid, their vision clean, but they needed someone who could make people believe again. We sat in a corner suite overlooking the Embarcadero. The senior partner across from me had a notebook, not a tablet. He listened. He asked about people, not numbers. At one point, he said, "Marla, we're not just offering a role. We're offering a stake. We know what you bring." It wasn't the equity that moved me. It was the phrasing. A stake, something to own, something to build, not for someone else, but for myself. That night, I walked past Ardent's headquarters on my way home, just a glance through the glass facade where the lights burned late and the new regime scurried like efficient shadows under blue-toned LEDs. I wondered if they even noticed how quiet it had become since I left. They'd taken my title, my office, my access, but they forgot what I really built, and now I was building it somewhere else. The restaurant was dimly lit, all dark wood and low murmurs, the kind of place where deals were made off the record and legacy names came to lick their wounds in private. Graham was already seated when I arrived. He stood when he saw me, out of habit more than warmth, and gestured to the chair across from him with the stiff civility of a man who wasn't sure if he was meeting a savior or a ghost. He looked older than I remembered. His blazer hung looser on his frame, and the lines around his mouth had deepened, carved by stress and sleepless nights. The waiter approached, and Graham waved him off without looking at the menu. I ordered tea. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't know," he said finally. His voice was low, almost brittle. "They kept me in London during the transition, said they needed me on the EU compliance rollout. By the time I returned, they'd already pushed me out," I finished calmly. He nodded, shame pressing his gaze to the table. "Elise requested a formal review with the board," he said. "Harding pulled his Q2 funding commitment. Alta's CFO won't take Reed's calls. It's unraveling." His fingers tapped the rim of his water glass. "I shouldn't have let them isolate you," he added. "You did, though. I didn't say it out loud. What would be the point? Instead, I waited. Let the silence fill the space between us like smoke. Let him feel the weight of everything he'd failed to protect. Then he dropped it. "We need you back," he said, leaning in now. "Not as director, as chief client officer, and we'll make you a full partner." The words were smooth, polished, probably rehearsed. Still, they held a hint of desperation underneath, the crackling sound of a structure trying to hold, even as the foundation shifted beneath it. I smiled. I tilted my head, studied him the way I might study a negotiation gone soft at the middle. "That's generous," I said. "Unexpected." "You're the only one who can stabilize this," he replied. "The clients trust you. The board's panicking." Of course they were. I folded my napkin slowly, carefully, as if it were the last thing tethering me to the old version of myself, the woman who would have accepted his offer, flattered and relieved, still hopeful for redemption within a system that had already decided she was obsolete. "I'll think about it," I told him. He exhaled, the sound of a man who believed he'd bought himself time. But what I didn't say, what I wouldn't say, was that 24 hours earlier, I'd stood in a conference room 20 stories above Market Street, shaking hands with Blackwell's executive team as they finalized a quiet acquisition deal with Horizon Capital, Ardent's controlling investor. It was done, signed, sealed. I wasn't returning to a house that had locked me out. I was acquiring the land it stood on. Graham didn't know that yet, but he would, soon. The boardroom was already full when I stepped inside. 12 high-backed chairs around a smoked glass table. Name placards, leather portfolios, a silver carafe of untouched coffee. A few familiar faces glanced up as I entered. Some stiffened, others offered tentative nods. No one smiled. Graham stood near the end of the room, one hand braced on the back of a chair, the other curled around a folded sheet of notes. His expression flickered between relief and apprehension. He didn't know what version of me had walked through that door. He tapped the microphone embedded in the table. "Before we begin today's quarterly report," he said, clearing his throat, "I'd like to acknowledge a development we're all very fortunate to witness. A turning point." The room settled into attention. "Today," Graham continued, voice lifting with rehearsed optimism, "I'm honored to welcome back Marla Benton as Ardent's new Chief Client Officer and full equity partner." There was a beat of stunned silence. Every head turned toward me. I stepped forward, calm and measured. The click of my heels was the only sound, like a countdown no one realized had already begun. "I appreciate the warm welcome," I said, "but there's been a misunderstanding." I paused, letting the air thicken. "I'm not coming back to Ardent." The room went still. A few pens froze, mid-scribble. Graham blinked once, twice, as if his brain were scrambling to process the detour. "I've accepted a partner role with Blackwell Consulting," I said evenly. "And as of 9 a.m. this morning, Blackwell has finalized an acquisition of controlling interest in Ardent via Horizon Capital." Silence. Then chaos, a rustle of chairs, raised voices. One board member cursed under his breath. Another began rifling through his tablet, likely searching for the press release he hadn't been briefed on. Graham looked as if the air had been punched out of his lungs. "But," he started. I met his eyes. "I told you I'd consider your offer," I said, and I did. Across the room, someone stood demanding clarification. A woman I didn't recognize asked who had authorized the transaction. I watched the fury gather and scatter like a brush fire no one could contain. I didn't respond because the only answer that mattered was already unfolding around them. The power had shifted, quietly, strategically, without spectacle or vengeance, just precision. Reed Stratton wasn't in the room. He never showed. By the time they realized what had happened, HR had already processed his termination, his access revoked, his badge disabled, just like mine had been weeks before. Only difference? Mine unlocked something better. I stepped away from the table, the conversation dissolving into noise behind me, projections, fallout plans, legal questions. None of it my concern now. They'd underestimated what I built. They assumed trust was a feature, not a foundation. And by the time they realized the difference, I was already walking out of the room they thought I'd begged to return to. I didn't gloat. I didn't strut through the halls like a woman who'd just flipped the entire boardroom table and walked away with the crown. That kind of victory is loud, temporary, the kind people write about on LinkedIn and forget in 6 weeks. Mine was quieter and permanent. The brass plaque on the front door now read, Blackwell Ardent. A hyphen would have been cleaner, but I didn't argue. It was never about branding. It was about presence. I returned on a Monday. No announcements, no grand gestures, just a simple calendar invite marked Staff Town Hall and my name listed beside it. Before the meeting, I walked the corridors I'd once been ghosted from. Now, mine, again. Not by entitlement, but by decision. Some faces brightened when they saw me, surprise giving way to relief. Others froze, caught somewhere between guilt and self-preservation. I didn't judge. I'd played this game long enough to know survival makes liars of most people. The junior analyst from operations, the one who used to bring me her grandmother's chicken soup recipe every holiday, asked if I'd be staying long. I smiled. As long as it takes, I said. My office had been reassigned, of course, but I didn't ask for it back. Instead, I chose a smaller space 2 floors up, nothing flashy, but with light, real light, the kind that warms your skin instead of bleaching it. Later that afternoon, I sat at my new desk and logged into the Client Insight dashboard. This time, there was no red screen, no denial, just a quiet chime, followed by the interface, blooming to life, familiar, loyal, waiting. I stared at it for a long moment. All the architecture was still there, the bones I'd laid down, but it had been twisted, modified under Reed's hand to prioritize churn cycles, growth velocity, and AI predicted upsell points. Relationships turned into heat maps. Human nuance reduced to customer segmentation. I didn't delete it. I didn't erase what they'd done. I reconfigured it. One line of code at a time, I shifted the weight back toward the human, restored the empathy functions, reconnected the feedback loops that allowed clients to tell us what they needed before metrics even caught it. Trust doesn't live in data. It lives in people. By Wednesday, the noise had settled. The shock began to fade, replaced by the slow rhythm of recalibration. Staff meetings resumed. Client calls were answered. Calmly, competently. We weren't rebuilding. We were recentering. I walked through each department over the next few days, sat beside teams, asked questions, listened more than I spoke. I didn't mention what had happened. I didn't need to. The silence carried everything it needed to. On Friday, as the sun began to slide down behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the polished floors, I paused at the glass wall overlooking the city. It was the same view from before, but it no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like perspective. And I realized something then. The most powerful statement isn't vengeance, it's grace. Undeniable, unapologetic, and silent. The weekend came quiet. No calls, no crises, no whispered rumors in digital hallways, just a strange, settled stillness, the kind that arrives after a storm has passed and the walls are still standing. I spent Sunday morning walking the Embarcadero, a ritual I hadn't touched in years. The breeze off the bay carried the smell of salt and coffee from open cafes, and the ferry horns groaned like slow exhalations. I passed runners, couples with strollers, and old men feeding birds like clockwork. No one knew who I was. No one asked. And for the first time in a long while, that anonymity felt like freedom, not erasure. When I returned home, I opened the balcony doors and let the air in. On my desk sat the old crystal paperweight Graham had given me 10 years ago, back when we still believed in building things that lasted. I'd packed it away after I was fired, buried it in a box with other remnants I didn't know whether to mourn or forget. Now it sat under the light again. I picked it up, ran my thumb along the smooth underside. It had a tiny crack now, spiderweb near the base, flawed but still whole, kind of like me. I thought about Reed. I thought about the look on Graham's face when I said no. I thought about every meeting room I'd been pushed out of, every idea repackaged under someone else's name, every moment I'd swallowed anger in the name of grace. And then I thought about the Blackwell team, the new hires who smiled without calculation, the clients who returned my calls not because they had to, but because they trusted I would listen, the way people spoke to each other now, with something that resembled hope. I didn't want to burn what came before. That would have been easy, satisfying in a shallow, theatrical kind of way. But I wasn't here to play the villain in someone else's story. I was here to write a better one. So I built something else, not out of spite, out of precision, patience, ownership. Because in the end, the goal was never revenge. It was recognition. It was remembering that I didn't need their permission to matter. I never had. Now, when I walk those halls, when my name appears in strategic meetings, on the dotted line of partnership contracts, on the lips of returning clients, I don't raise my voice. I don't have to. I've already said everything I needed to, not in words, but in presence, in the foundation, in the bridge they tried to demolish, and the one I rebuilt, stronger, quieter, and entirely mine. I didn't burn bridges, but I did build a better one, and this time I own it. The story of Marla Benton isn't just a corporate revenge tale. It's a masterclass in dignity, resilience, and reclaiming power without raising your voice. Marla's journey shows us that in a world obsessed with metrics, loyalty and human connection remain irreplaceable. She was quietly erased from a company she helped build, labeled legacy fat by a leadership too short-sighted to recognize the roots that had kept them grounded. But instead of fighting fire with fire, Marla chose silence, observation, and precision. The lesson here isn't about retaliation. It's about self-worth, about knowing what you bring to the table, even when others try to pull the chair out from under you. Marla didn't shout her value. She let it echo through the relationships she had nurtured for decades. And in the end, it wasn't her exit that changed the game. It was her absence. Her clients followed, not out of loyalty to a company, but to a person who had always seen and respected them. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most transformative power move is to walk away and then rebuild on your own terms, not to destroy, but to create something stronger, something yours, because recognition doesn't always come from titles or applause. Sometimes it comes from the quiet return to a space that once dismissed you and being the one holding the keys. You don't need to burn bridges to make a point. Sometimes the better story is the one where you build a new one, and this time you own it. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If Marla's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or quietly erased, know this. Your voice still matters. Your worth doesn't expire. And sometimes the most powerful move is the one made in silence, with strategy and self-respect. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of quiet strength, redemption, and poetic justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your story isn't over. You're just getting started. See you in the next chapter.